It's one of the techniques that I use with a large number of my patients is to have them look back at everything that they had to go through as kids and imagine a child they care about going through the same thing. And that can help people recognize the reality of the burden that they had to carry at that time. And having a realistic sense of how much you had to endure is a way to recognize your own strength, a way to replace negative beliefs about yourself with a recognition that it really took some heroic perseverance on your part to go through everything that you had to go through.
Welcome to the Story Behind the Symptoms. Your host is David Clark, MD, a board-certified gastroenterologist who successfully diagnosed and treated over 7,000 patients with neuroplastic pain or illness. We'll dive into our guests' life experiences to uncover the deeper causes of their symptoms. By listening to their story, you will gain insights that advance your own journey toward knowledge that becomes healing.
Hello, and welcome to the Story Behind the Symptoms podcast. I am your host, Dr. David Clark, and on this podcast, we interview people who have suffered neuroplastic symptoms and try to figure out where they came from and what needs to be done to recover. And my guest today is Nicole, who comes to us from Central America. And Nicole, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, my name is Nicole. I'm coming from Costa Rica. I live here now. And I've had a long history, potentially a lifetime history of neuroplastic pain and or symptoms. I've had some extreme success in some categories and still some lingering, troubles in other categories. So I'm really, really excited to be on today.
Great to have you with us. Well, we always start with where the symptoms started. Approximately how old were you? What kinds of symptoms did you have? And what was their progress over time?
Yeah, so I became familiar with this approach and with the mind-body connection in my 20s. But if I look back to my childhood, since I can remember, I'm pretty certain I had neuroplastic symptoms. As a child, I remember having like constipation, and it was painful to go to the bathroom, and my parents handing me prune juice while I was sitting on the toilet. I remember having growing pains where just, limbs would kind of hurt for no reason. So my parents would massage my calves. I had eczema behind, in the inside of like my elbows and my knees. So nothing that was extreme, but when I look back at all of those things, I can kind of associate it to like a neuroplastic component. As a preteen, about 10 years old, I started a really early menstruation, probably the first female in my class, and it was frequent and heavy and painful. And around that time, I'm not actually sure if I started to have insomnia, but which is one of the things that has been a little bit of a lingering, not a little bit of a lingering, a pretty large problem for me consistently for the rest of my life. But I do remember around that 10 to 13 years old time, like sneaking to stay up late in my bedroom to listen to TV shows or radio shows at the time it was. So I don't know if that was because I couldn't sleep and that's when the insomnia had started, or if I was just training my body in that way at the time. I had a weird allergy called, I believe it's called cold urticaria. It's like an allergy to the cold. So if you have a cold exposure, for example, the way that they would test for it is taking a cold soda can and putting it against your skin. So if I had exposure to some sort of cold like that, I would break out in hives. And I lived in New Jersey at the time, so we definitely had cold winters. So when I look back at that time and I look back at my home environment at the time, I can see a correlation to what could have caused those things and what could have definitely caused a bit of dysregulation in my nervous system. I know oftentimes it's a home environment, which for many years I thought mine was very stable, because my parents loved and still do love me very much. They were still together. We had enough money to live, like a healthy middle class lifestyle. But now looking back at the tools my parents had maybe versus what they didn't have and the struggles that they went through, I grew up with my mom had depression and anxiety. My dad would have extremely angry outbursts. That was very common. And sometimes he would just get angry and disappear for an uncertain amount of time. And at the time, it didn't bother me. I thought I was a strong child, like, oh, who cares, whatever. I know he's coming back. But now as an adult, I can see how dysregulating that is for your nervous system.
Yeah, none of us has a parallel life we can compare ourselves with to see, what might have been distressing for us and what might not have been. We're just living one life, and particularly to a child, it feels like that's the normal experience. When he would leave, what kind of duration would that be? Hours, days, week?
No, it would be for hours, but it would be in a way of, kind of leaving important things at home. I remember him doing it, honestly, when I was an adult, for like a Thanksgiving. Just we were all supposed to walk out the door for Thanksgiving, and he got mad about something. His wallet was there, his phone was there. We all went to Thanksgiving for an entire day without him, and no contact, no hearing if he was okay, if he was going to show up. And coming home and he's still not there. And then hours later, even though it might only be for a few hours, coming home and then as if nothing happened, like everybody in the household had to pretend it was okay and that nothing happened. He would pretend nothing happened to go back to normal, and so would we. So I think in those moments, there was zero conflict resolution. And that was probably a very important missing link for me.
Absolutely. Okay. We'll definitely come back to that, of course, but let's keep going with the story of your symptoms.
Yeah. So also in my teenage years, maybe we'll come back to this as well, but now as an adult, I kind of learned about the adverse childhood experiences and what some kind of big T versus small T traumas were. And in my teenage years, I had symptoms of migraines and more skin allergies. I would get tested and I'd have an allergy to dust and I'd have an allergy to mold. I started having eczema over my eyes and, going to dermatologists that would give me steroids to calm the eczema over the eyes. And, at the time, my friend group they were kind of the mean girls, within my friend group, I was bullied by what I called at the time a couple of my best girlfriends at, 13 years old. So I think it was a very, maybe I needed the friendships outside of the house, but the friendships were not healthy either. And I did end up, I did in my teenage years end up having, kind of a big T trauma, a sexual assault. And, that now I look back and I can see how much that probably shaped the neuroplastic symptoms of mine as they continued throughout my life. But at the time, again, I was so angry. I just, I thought I was so strong and I didn't need therapy and, kind of like a fuck him, sort of mindset. But again, the amount of nervous system dysregulation that leaves lingering chronically in your body is, I understand it now as an adult.
Well, you would have had acquired a lot of skills at keeping emotions repressed from your early life experience. Both your mother and your father would have been behaving in ways that would have been very upsetting to a child, but the way of handling those in your household was not to handle them and to take whatever emotions were happening and just stuff them somewhere. So it would have been the natural reaction to a severe trauma like a sexual assault to take those emotions and do the same thing with them.
Yeah, and honestly, it was a classmate, and I took him to court, and he was found not guilty. And then I had to continue to go to school with the guy. So can you imagine the amount of, you know, frustration and anger and shame and you know, and again, kind of coming from a family that didn't really know how to help me. I mean, I think my parents at the time encouraged me to seek therapy, and I was like, I don't want to. You know, but
Yeah, on top
so
of everything else, you have the criminal justice system invalidating your experience.
exactly.
And
The
it's also the case, and I've observed this in many of my patients, that when you are in a home environment that makes a child feel like they're not good enough or they're not measuring up or their ability to solve problems in the home is inadequate, that it gives you a um, internal sense of not being good enough that makes you vulnerable to bullies.
yeah,
That bullies are always looking for a target, and the
yeah.
ideal target is somebody who um, brings to the table a sense that they're not as good as other kids. Um,
Yeah, I think something that's really helped me in watching these podcasts is understanding because I feel like you know, I'm more than good enough. I feel like I have a lot of self-worth. Um, but I think it's on such an unconscious level that these things can happen when you're younger. Like, you know, my parents were really supportive of me, you know, kind of, you know, whatever you want to do, as long as you do your best, as long as you try your hardest, it's okay. You know, there was no in any way type kind of verbal abuse. It was more verbal uplifting in that way. But again, to your point, if you're a child at home and you're seeing things going on that are destabilizing and you can't fix them, and you try to fix them or you try to just be good, be good, be good, be better, you become a perfectionist because maybe that will make things easier.
exactly
Um,
right.
you know,
Yeah,
maybe that's what then makes you vulnerable to the bullies and you know.
absolutely. Children don't have that many things that they can do to try to solve problems in the household. And being a perfect child is one of the strategies that kids will follow to try to make things better. And of course, nobody can do that in a sustained way, let alone as a child. And then if you have a parent who is saying, you're okay as long as you do your best, nobody can do their best 100% of the time. And so if you fall short of doing your best some of the
Mhm.
time, which is normal, that just kind of compounds the idea that uh, you're just plain not good enough. And outside the household, you're vulnerable to bullies, and bullies pick up on the fact that you're vulnerable to them, and you become a target, which just compounds the sense that at home or away from home, you're not measuring up, you're not good enough. And it becomes an internalized assumption about who you are. And then to have the justice system jump on that as well.
Yeah, the justice system and the schools. So I think, you know, the biggest traumas for me that came out of that, apart from the incident itself, were being invalidated by the justice system. And then, of course, you're invalidated by even the teachers, you know, the people that are supposed to be the adults that are supporting you. You know, I had that, you know, being looked at as I'm you know, I brought this on myself sort of view. And it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible.
Yeah, this was before the Me Too movement,
It was before
and
me too.
there was a
Hmm.
lot of false beliefs around these episodes. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, 100%. So going into my 20s, I still continued to, you know, have this array of symptoms, migraines. I got into a relationship at that time that I, you know, would really liked, loved, cared for, whatever you want to call it, the guy. But looking back now, he was a narcissist, like toxic, you know. So I started having more problems physically around that time. I had something I was calling pee anxiety, where I felt, especially if I was trapped in a place that I couldn't get to a bathroom, like, oh my God, I have to go to the bathroom right now. And that's when I really started having some severe insomnia. And I broke up with the guy. I remember going to an internist and checking, and my bladder was fine, and speaking to him about my sleep and asking for a sleep prescription. And, he was extremely cold, and he was like, well, what do you think about at night? And I was like, well, I just broke up with this boyfriend of 3 years. And I started crying in his office. And instead of taking the approach that I see that you have taken with all of your patients, he was so cold. And he was like, well, I think you have depression and anxiety and you should see a therapist. Boom, slam the door shut. And again, I kind of had this reaction like, fuck you. Like, again, like my experience being totally invalidated. And I was like, maybe I could just, maybe I'm not depressed. Maybe if I could sleep, I would feel much better, but I can't sleep. So
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I learned early on was that my patients who have these issues are mentally stronger than most people because of the amount of stress that they are carrying. The analogy that I often make is to an Olympic weightlifter who's being asked to carry 50 pounds more than the world record for their weight class. They're very strong people, but they don't feel strong because of the amount that they're carrying. And if that doctor had taken the time to hear the story that we just heard, which hasn't taken that long to tell, they would recognize that this is somebody who's very strong, but through no fault of her own has had to carry a huge amount. And the narcissistic boyfriend is another outcome, that if you have spent your childhood trying to solve other people's problems, adults' problems, it is only natural to find yourself in a relationship with somebody who has problems, somebody who has needs and issues, and that you are going to be providing support to that person, much as you did in trying to solve the problems in your household as a younger person. So having these unbalanced relationships where you are giving a lot more than you are getting back, and the narcissist is the classic person to be taking everything and not giving back. That's a very normal outcome for something like this. It just feels like absolutely the kind of relationship that is supposed to be in your life. And getting to the point where you can accept a relationship with somebody that gives to you as much as you are giving to them, that takes a lot of time. That takes a major shift in a person's self-image to be able to accept that somebody who's very, very positive towards you, that they are having that approach for a good reason, because you deserve to have a very positive approach. But that concept of oneself takes a long time to develop.
It does take a long time. And I think this area has shaped my career as well, because funny of your weightlifting example, like I'll get into the back pain portion of my story right now, but the positive outcome of my back pain story is, I did become a personal trainer, and not only a strength coach, but now my work has gone a lot more into the mind body element of things. So whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, probably a little bit of both. Now I am using that strength in helping other people in areas that have helped me on one hand, but on the other hand, it's an industry and a field where I'm also continuing to give and help people on a daily basis, which is extremely gratifying and fulfilling for me. But it is a lot of giving, and to end up having a partner that gives you the amount of receiving that you deserve as well is like you said, it's a very long shift to come into that space.
Yeah, it's a huge part of the healing process. Okay, on with the symptoms.
So mid-20s, around the time of that boyfriend, I was breaking up with him, started having extreme back pain. call out of work. At that point, I was in fashion. I had to just lay flat. I couldn't sit at a desk. I got an MRI. It showed a herniated disc. And they would say that the disc was, bulging and pinching on the nerve. And I remember seeing on the prescription, and I know this is a big part of people's symptoms getting exacerbated, right? Is it was written DDD. And I remember asking, like, what's DDD? And they were like, oh, degenerative disc disease. I mean, meanwhile, I'm 25 years old. I had been playing sports my whole life, like active person. I loved dancing. So that part didn't make sense to me. I was like, I don't know about that. But yeah, surely on the MRI, I can see the bulging disc, right? And I went to physical therapy multiple times, multiple steroid injections. I would have extreme spasms where it would look like my whole rib cage was contorted to the side of my body because I was so spasmed. And nothing would help long term. And as we know now with back pain, but maybe what we didn't know so well at the time is my pain kept moving, right? And that's a classic, symptom to show that this is actually a neuroplastic component or a mind-body component because it's not associated very specifically with one nerve pathway where you would see the pain coming to the same spot every time, right? So at that time, I committed to doing everything in my power to avoid surgery. I researched a ton. I found John Sarno's Healing Back Pain, the Mind Body Connection book, and started reading it. And I love psychology. I always studied it, kind of as a hobby. So it was very intriguing to me. And I was like, this makes sense. This is 100% makes sense for a lot of people, but not me. I have something
Okay.
structural. I have something structural, So I was like, I've seen it. It's structural. Until I got later into the book and I started to see the personality type of people that would have this back pain. And it was people pleaser, do-gooder, perfectionist, type A, and he had patient examples. And I started to see myself on every page of the book. And I just remember halfway through just sobbing and thinking about, the kind of passively condescending attitude of my ex-boyfriend and how much suppressed rage I had and feelings of inferiority. It all landed so hard. And it clicked. I mean, that part of my story is where the knowledge alone completely cured me. I was struggling with this for years. I think within months or even weeks, I was, back to the gym, back to just signaling safety to my body. I started running obstacle course races. Like I fell in love with physical activity again. And it was just hands down 100% the cause and effect. And I was able to, with knowledge alone, make that change, which has stuck, by the way. This was like 16 years ago. I have zero. I mean, I'm like, not so whatever, but I'm kind of like elite level athlete for 16 years now, with more or less zero flare-ups. And if I have them, I can get out of them really quickly by taking this approach.
Great. Yeah, that's a fairly common story when people recognize themselves in all of these secondary phenomena like the personality traits. Was there a particular idea out of all of that you think made the biggest difference for you in overcoming this? Was there an impact on how you thought about yourself as a person, or some other shift that you can recall from that time?
I tried not to self-blame because in the moment, I think you look at it and you're like, oh my God, could I have brought this? I brought this on myself. This isn't a trauma from a physical hit in some way, like, car accident or something. Like, this is my body bringing it on itself. So there is a little bit of that gut reaction, but I knew that only kind of blocks the process of healing. So I started to try to, understand that. And I think in the book, Sarno explained it pretty well. It's a safety precaution. It's your brain doing its job. It's a protection mechanism. And, his take on it at that time, which was, many years ago now, was that it was a distraction from the emotional triggers in your life. And if you could just recognize what those emotional triggers are that are suppressing the emotions, you don't even need to clear up the problem. You just need to have the awareness that they're there. That part was empowering. And I was like, you know what, I might have created this, but it wasn't from a place that I need to blame myself. It was, I had these big suppressed emotions that my brain thought were too big to come to the surface, and it was trying to protect me. So having that self-compassionate approach is really important at that stage, I
Yeah,
think.
very much so. Yeah, it's essentially the essence of pain reprocessing therapy, to shift your attention from whatever's going on in your body to whatever's happening in the mind that's trying to express its distress. And so you're shifting your attention to thinking about, well, where are these sources of stress coming from? And that's the foundation for being able to do something about them, to make some changes. Okay, so you had a breakthrough improvement, but unfortunately, other things began to happen after that.
Yeah, I think my insomnia never fully went away. It would always go, my sleep was never great. It would always kind of go in roller coasters. Towards the end of my 20s, I got into a much healthier place. I became a personal trainer, started working at a company I loved. I got in a new relationship with a man that I loved, a much healthier relationship. Um, Started getting really into strength training and running obstacle course races and playing sports again and having, um, yeah, a really happy life. But then into my early 30s, I wasn't so happy with my company anymore. They were kept putting me up for promotion, and then I would do all of this work to get it, and then they would just like eliminate the position, you know. And then he's now my ex, the guy that I was dating at the time. We had a great start. But then we started really going on different life paths. And this was the man that I thought for sure was teaching me how to be in a healthy relationship. And I wanted him to be my husband and have my kids. And then our paths in life just started to diverge. So then there started to become problems in that relationship. And we eventually broke up. And this was about a year before the pandemic, or just slightly before. And that's when I started having, again, bad migraines. I had extreme bloating. I would get the gastrointestinal test, the breath test positive for SIBO, take antibiotics for that. I would get the face eczema again and be given steroids for that. And I always got the eczema whenever I traveled. So I was like, oh, maybe it's the chemicals in the sheets or something. Until one day, I think I was in Hawaii and I got a facial with a woman there, and she was like, well, eczema is stress related. And I was like, how about I'm in Hawaii? Like, I'm not stressed, And she was like, did you have some stress leading up to the trip? And I was like, oh, well, yeah, I worked like 3 times as hard to get clients in, and I had to do this and I had to do that. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe you have a point. The troubling thing at that time, I started having panic attacks while I was driving my car. Still living in New Jersey at the time, I would have panic attacks driving on the busiest highway in New Jersey, to the point where I really feared for my safety. And that was how I traveled to work or to visit my parents at their beach house. And that became, yeah, really, really troubling. I'll kind of skip forward a little bit here because then the pandemic happened, and the world just blew up, and a lot of things changed. But right as the pandemic was happening, I knew I wanted to make some shifts. I knew I wasn't really happy at my company anymore. The panic attacks were teaching me something. They were teaching me that I was, no longer happy in my environment. I went to do my yoga teacher training in Bali. And I just really connected with being outdoors, with teaching in a way, with a group of amazing women that was super fulfilling for me. Starting to learn to surf. And I was just feeling all of these things that were making me feel super fulfilled, things that I didn't have in New Jersey. And we did a breathwork session. And the instructor kind of led us through this journey. And I just started crying in the session. You kind of get deep into your subconscious in the breathwork practice, and you're not really thinking anymore. You're kind of deep into more primal, I think, reaction sometimes. And just as I'm crying, I was, what are these? Are these happy tears? Are they sad tears? Like, what is the emotion that's coming up? I couldn't find the emotion. Then halfway through the session, there was like a download that came. It was like, you hate working indoors. Like, you can't work indoors anymore. You hate working indoors. The gym feels like a prison. You need to work outdoors. You're done with the United States. Like, you need to move out of the United States. So all of this stuff came to me, and I kind of had a big revelation that it was time for me to make some big life changes. And of course, as I'm in Bali for this teacher training, there's this crazy virus that's starting in China, and the question was, do I allow myself to get stuck here, or do I go home? So I went home. I decided to go home and figure it out from there, but I knew that I would want to make some changes eventually. And when I came home, I didn't have as much anxiety because I wasn't driving to and from work anymore. And regardless of the fact that travel was impossible for the whole world, I knew that I wanted travel and seeing other cultures and being in other countries to be a bigger part of my experience in life. So regardless of the fact that I could barely even leave New Jersey at the time, I was researching, locations in Costa Rica and the south of Spain and Bali, like, where am I going to pick up and make a big change in my life for? I ended up landing in Costa Rica, which is where I am now. And then again, fast forward, very happy life here, huge changes, less work, more time for play, surfing, spending time with friends, dancing, going to the beach, all these amazing things. And after about a year of being here, I got in a traumatic ATV accident. My friend was driving a quad, and I was on the back of it, and she flipped it. And I dislocated my clavicle. I tore 2 ligaments in my shoulder. I had to have like an emergency flight to the city to have shoulder surgery. So I have this trauma of the accident itself, emergency surgery, and then within 2 weeks of that, I got COVID, which turned into long COVID because this was like 2021, So I had a really, really rough recovery process from that. The shoulder healed extremely well through physical therapy, but I started getting so bloated, so constipated, extreme insomnia. Over the next year or two after that, I had crazy reactions on my hands. Like, it started as eczema, but then it would kind of, open up into almost like open wounds on the hands, to the point where I was wrapping them in like gauze to ride my bicycle. I couldn't weight lift at the gym anymore. I like teaching yoga, like I couldn't touch anybody. I was being prescribed steroids, which were thinning the skin, which making it even worse for like weightlifting, and scared to be in the ocean and surf because I didn't want anything to get infected. So even though the shoulder healed really well, I had an extreme amount of like dysregulation in my body at the time. That was a few years ago. Everything has pretty much finally started to subside now, except for the sleep.
Okay. Well, if these symptoms were neuroplastic, which we presume they probably were, typically that's an expression of the mind being in a state of distress. But it sounds from what you've described that you were in a great environment. You were having a chance to take care of yourself, to do things that are for your own joy, which is something that I prescribe routinely for people.
I take that very seriously.
I appreciate that. It is an essential human skill. But what then might have triggered all this? Because it sounds like a significant relapse, in a different location in your body than before. But these symptoms definitely sound neuroplastic, and Therefore, they must have had a trigger of some kind. But what might it have
Yeah.
been?
I think I was working with a therapist at the time that in Spanish, I don't know what the name is or even if there's a position for this in States, but in Spanish, it's a psiconeuroinmunologica. So it's a therapist that is taking an emotional therapeutic approach to having conversations with you, obviously about your emotions, but with a three-prong approach in that what you're feeling emotionally or not feeling because you're suppressing is then having an effect on your nervous system. And how does that affect your nervous system? And then when your nervous system is chronically dysregulated, then how does that have an effect on your immune system? So maybe, yes, I live in somewhat of a harsh environment. There are parasites here and fungus and mold and recently last year I had tests in my blood of like a really high level of lead in my blood. I did a whole big lead detox. Um, so there is a bit of a harsh environment, but my intuition, my thought process behind it is, I'm a strong, healthy person and young. Like we're built to be able to be exposed to these things and then recover from them, right? So my thought is that maybe even if I have had environmental or medical things that I've actually been exposed to, um, there is that acute time, and then you would typically heal. And where for me, I think a lot of the mind body components come in is it takes what should be acute symptoms and makes them chronic. And after that ATV accident, I felt very very dysregulated to like a PTSD sort of component where there's a lot of motorcycles and quads on the dirt roads here. And I would just walk and I would hear a moto behind me and I'd like tense up and freeze up and, kind of image that someone was going to get in an accident. So even though I kind of stopped taking those sort of vehicles after that to help regulate my nervous system, I think that there was just an overarching lack of safety, feeling of safety in my body, in general from the accident. And also at the time, I was living in a house that was standalone. I've always lived in apartments. And in apartments, I like the feeling that there's other people nearby. In that standalone house, I felt a bit isolated. And, even though it was in a safe area, like I still in my body felt at risk, just being a woman living alone. And I think there's a component of that that goes back to, I'll share a bit more the sexual assault that was that I had when I was a teenager. It was a rape in my own bedroom, and I was drunk. So I thought that it wasn't so bad because I didn't remember it so well. But now I know, especially through like Gabor Mate's work and stuff, like the body remembers it. My body remembers it. It remembers that lack of safety. And if you have something like you're living in a house where you don't feel entirely secure, you're a woman alone, that at the same time as the ATV accident, where again, my body was not safe in that accident. I very easily could have died there. That lack of safety, I think, just left me extremely dysregulated, which, eventually led to these immune responses as well.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That when you grow up in an environment that's not safe, you're going to carry a certain amount of vulnerability to that for a long time. And if you find yourself in an environment where dangerous things can happen, it's going to call those forth. It's going to resuscitate those old fears. I've also observed in some people that when they get to a better place in their life, that emotions that they've repressed for a long time are now able to come to the surface and be felt and be discussed and dealt with. And the therapist that you were seeing there in Costa Rica was probably talking to you about those things, and that emotions that you might have buried for 30 years might finally have felt capable of coming to the surface.
Yeah.
Did you have any experiences that would align with that?
A bunch. I mean, I think, in addition to the therapeutic approach, I dove super deep into the mind body world. And, here everything feels, being so immersed in nature, there's something that feels really spiritual to it, spiritual elements. So, with that, I started, diving a lot deeper into, meditation and subconscious work through hypnotherapy and kind of different areas that would help me understand maybe some emotions that I had suppressed or things I had suppressed. And yeah, I had some big revelations through there are a few moments like that. I think in a deep meditation of intuition and once during a hypnotherapy session where the session was geared towards insomnia. It was the insomnia, the bloating the skin at the time. And I was kind of in and out of it. And she was talking to me about, all of those things, nothing related to anything else. And I was kind of, just all of a sudden, as if I'm about to go to sleep and a voice in my head just wakes me up and it's like, you don't want to have kids. Something completely unrelated in my head to all of these things. But I came out of that and I was like, huh, I thought I wanted to have kids my whole life, like really wanted to have kids. And as I was getting later into my 30s, I was always like, yeah, I really want to have kids, but not now. I really want to have kids, but not yet, but no time soon. And so since moving here and diving into some of that deeper work, I've done powerful meditations or breathwork sessions or hypnotherapy where something that's seated a little deeper inside of me has come up, like a big life decision like that. And and then sat with it and journaled on it and is this really how I feel? And it's actually, maybe this is really how I feel. There's a lot of pressure to live your life a certain way. So when you're doing what I'm doing and going against the grain and moving to Costa Rica and starting your own business during a pandemic and deciding not to have kids when your whole family probably really wanted you to have kids, there's a big amount of going against the grain that should, in theory, have an element of freedom to it. And of course it does, but there's an element of like shame that you have to come to terms with. You're not living up to society's expectations.
Yeah, that shame is one of the more powerful emotions and absolutely capable of causing symptoms in the body. And when you think about it, if you had a best friend who was telling you the same thing, that I feel shame for the life choices I've made and the choice not to have kids, you would not be saying yes to your friend. You should feel ashamed of that, right? And yet you're having some of that on yourself, which is potentially capable of causing symptoms in the body. Another issue that I see commonly in people, especially when they get to a much better and safer place in their life, is that negative emotions, resentment, anger toward their parents comes up. It's one of the most difficult areas to have negative emotions about people that you also care about, that you simultaneously have positive feelings towards. But there's this other side that may have been repressed for 30 plus years that is legitimately resentful of what they made you go through. And how do you reconcile that in a safe way? How do you allow yourself to have those negative emotions about people who are clearly doing their best, but have those negative emotions because they're legitimate, and to have them without feeling shame about them? Did any of that ever come up?
Yeah, it did. That was definitely a struggle and a big part of my process as well. I also did work with another mentor who was, kind of a bit more into, shadow work. And we did get into, the uncomfortable emotions of, because at that time I was like, I really want to improve. I feel still at 30 something years old, a bit of tension with my parents. Like again, there's this love, but there's this tension in the room, and I couldn't reconcile with it. So I think starting to understand that both can exist and you don't need to choose. Like, you can have frustration, anger, resentment for maybe the things that you were lacking growing up, the emotional support in the way that you needed emotional support. They would try to support me emotionally in the way that they knew how, but I attribute it like like you're speaking a different love language. Like, my love language is this, and theirs was this, and I needed this. So I think even just understanding the concept that different feelings and emotions can exist at the same time, and that's normal and that's safe, and just like normalizing that is really helpful too. It's helped me in multiple relationships, not just with my parents, because I know for me, I've always felt like I need to decide. I need to kind of decide the way I feel about something, and that's just not reality of like our complex feelings and emotions as a human being.
Yeah, it's one of the techniques that I use with a large number of my patients is to have them look back at everything that they had to go through as kids and imagine a child they care about going through the same thing. And that can help people recognize the reality of the burden that they had to carry at that time. And having a realistic sense of how much you had to endure is a way to recognize your own strength, a way to replace negative beliefs about yourself with a recognition that it really took some heroic perseverance on your part to go through everything that you had to go through. And when
Yeah.
you internalize that self-belief, that a realistic and legitimate appreciation for your own strength, then those shame emotions ideally are going to evaporate, because that's a shame is a huge burden. Shame is capable of causing physical symptoms in the body, including insomnia.
Yeah.
And if you can wash that away and replace it with the fact that you essentially um, achieved the moral equivalent of climbing Mount Everest as a kid, with the amount that you had to overcome, and internalizing pride in that achievement is a huge foundation for better self-care, for better close personal relationships, for reducing the stress level, for no longer needing to be perfect, and for putting yourself on the list of people you take care of. But
Yeah.
it's a 180-degree flip from the self-image that you had imposed on you growing up.
Yeah, and I think it's helped a lot. I think the one area that I tend to still struggle with is I do think because I've had so many things come up from like an unconscious or subconscious layer. I still imagine that there's some internalized belief systems that I'm probably not like. That's probably why I still haven't gotten to the bottom to eliminate really the insomnia for forever, because I've been able to, through all of this sort of work, move beyond the other things. I now I catch myself if I am speaking to myself in a self-critical way. I never do that anymore. If I do, I catch myself, and I recognize my strength and my work very much on a cognitive, on a conscious level. I think there's probably still some layers on a deeper belief system level that is what's causing the lingering inability to just sleep well. Some of the things that have really helped me get past the gut issues, the gut health issues, the skin issues when I was working with the one therapist. Like, even though I was maybe using like an anti fungal or like an antibacterial on my hands, but when I would put it on, she would have me talk. Even if I was taking a medical approach, I would take a mind body approach. Like, I would talk to my hands in a loving way and be like, "You're safe. Like, I love you. Like, I know you're triggered right now. It's okay." While I'd be putting on the prescription. So I would say through all of my neuroplastic symptoms, like most of the times I ever had a lab result or something, there was actually something there. I know often people on this journey, they will see every doctor under the sun and they'll get lab work done and they'll be like, everything's normal. Well, for me, like I would actually, okay, you have, a bacterial infection, you have a fungal reaction, you have lead in your blood at like a triple the level of the dangerous amount, So I would always get results that had maybe, again, like a medical explanation, but then you do the treatment and they should go away right then and there. And, for mine, oftentimes things would stay chronic. And that's where I would implement the mind body approach of just, speaking safety to my system, you know, um, doing somatic practices, vagus nerve somatic practices, doing that sort of thing, especially after setting a boundary. Of course, I started learning how to set boundaries. So that's been big. But actually setting a really uncomfortable boundary with, someone who is important to me, and then doing a somatic practice to help myself feel grounded and regulated afterward would be very important. Listening to these podcasts has been extremely helpful as well. And I
Okay.
think it's hard not to continue if there's something still going on to continue to make a medical appointment. But, like using the back pain as an example, if I would have a flare up, like a sciatica or something after surfing, I would just know for a fact that it was mind body related. And I would, in essence, kind of talk myself out of it and be like, don't book the physio appointment. Don't book the physio appointment. You know where this is coming from. And then a day later, I'd be completely fine and surfing by the next afternoon with like zero pain. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's great when you reach the level that you can use the physical neuroplastic symptoms as a signal that your mind needs attention in some way. In your application for this podcast, you mentioned you had communicated with Gabor Mate. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So, in the time that I came to Costa Rica right after the pandemic, he was a presenter in like a wellness summit, and it was pure pandemic time. So what might have been 200 people was a very small group, and he wasn't there in person, but he did lead a talk and a conversation, and he got to use me, or I got to use him as an example of something that he was discussing at the time. And I think, at the moment I had probably described to him some of my history and my neuroplastic symptoms. And I remember a moment where we were talking and he was using me as an example. And I was like, well, yeah, I had parents that were always there for me and stuff. And he kind of just gave me this look like you were a lot more alone than you think or than you thought growing up. And I just felt this like mic drop moment. And I was like, oh, even though they were physically there for me, I was emotionally alone. I was emotionally alone in my friendships. I was emotionally alone in my family. Um,
And you would have been
probably.
trying to solve those problems. You would have been trying to help your mother with her anxiety and depression.
Exactly.
You would have been trying to be perfect so that your dad wouldn't blow up. You would have been essentially living in a minefield.
Yeah.
On some days you can walk through the field and everything's fine, and on another day something blows up. And
Yeah. As the child, you would hope that you could express your emotions to your mom, and I would not, because I wouldn't want to trigger her anxiety because it would make me feel worse. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the shame comes from that as well. Oh, dad has left again. I messed up.
Yeah.
If I'd been a better little kid, he wouldn't have left.
Yeah.
And people carry shame from that. And that would be very much worth exploring today, is what's triggering shame today,
Yeah.
because that's one of the most powerful emotions, and rarely is it justified.
Yeah. Yeah. I will definitely do that. I had let's see, I had a question for you. Um, have you noticed or researched or kind of seen that with certain areas of people with neuroplastic symptoms, they have solutions that have helped, okay, so for example, it was the knowledge that helped my back pain. I would say with the skin issues, it was self-compassion. So in my life, I've had some correlations between the knowledge is not helping me at all right now for the insomnia. Let's put that out there. That's the knowledge of it being neuroplastic is not helping, but it was the sole thing and continues to be for back pain. So have you seen any correlation, or is that completely dependent?
A correlation between what and what?
Okay, a specific category of symptoms, let's call it gut, let's call it gut health, with gut health with shame,
Okay,
or
okay, I see what
you
you
know what I
mean.
mean, or something that really helps in this category. The knowledge alone helps in this category, or
Yeah, it is obviously highly variable from person to person, and two people with seemingly the same psychosocial stress issues can have completely different manifestations. One person gets fatigue and somebody else gets migraines and somebody else gets both. And the people who have symptoms that endure the longest, or that relapse after symptoms in one part of the body have healed and new symptoms crop up somewhere else, or who reach a certain level of improvement with the knowledge-based treatment and then can't seem to go further and get complete healing. Usually the deepest level of difficulties to uncover are the emotions. People who have grown up having to repress their negative emotions about what's going on in their household from an early age, they get very good at it,
yeah,
and they're disconnected from those emotions. And it's obviously the negative ones: anger, fear, shame,
hmm
grief, guilt, and getting connected with those is often the most difficult, but the most beneficial step for people who've gone so far with their healing, but not farther. And so, how do you do that? And one of the techniques, again, is to imagine a child you care about. I don't know if you have any nieces or nephews, or some other child in your life you can connect to, but imagine the kid growing up exactly as you did while you watch. It's one of the most common exercises I prescribe. You've heard it probably every one of these podcasts, but it helps a lot
yeah,
with people connecting with emotions. How would you feel watching this, 8-year-old or whatever, trying to cope with that environment? And what would you say to that kid after they lived in that environment for a week and then emerged and were somewhat traumatized even by just a week of living there? And how would you support them when they came out of that environment? And how positively would you feel towards that child who had just endured that environment for a week, and then recognizing that you went through that for in round numbers 1,000 weeks? And how positively should you be feeling about yourself for that achievement? And then once you've got some of those thoughts bouncing around in your brain, to sit down and write about them.
yeah,
And another exercise I do commonly is to have people write an unmailed letter to their parents.
hmm
Again, not to mail it, just to write it, to take
hmm
these ideas from the exercise and write "Dear Dad" and then "Dear Mom," and put down everything, good and bad,
yeah,
and just let your brain flow. Because the more of the emotions you can put onto a piece of paper or a computer screen, the less those emotions need to manifest in your body,
yeah.
which can be a physical symptom like bloating, or it can be insomnia. But that's often the most difficult sort of final step in somebody's recovery from childhood trauma, is to connect with the emotions and be able to put them into words.
Actually, you just gave me a great idea. I did have one session with of your what's the name of the other podcast? The story behind the symptoms, the one with John Gacianica.
Yes. The solution behind the symptoms.
The solution behind the symptoms. So I had an amazing session with him. This was only about a month or two ago. We were targeting my sleep. And he gave me a meditation practice that basically is teaching my brain and my body to be able to express the emotion and then self-soothe, and then express again and then self-soothe, so that if I have triggers, or something come up throughout the day, that my body gets used to this practice of experiencing an emotion and then going back to a regulated state. And in any moment that I've felt any anxiety, this practice has been extremely helpful for me. In the past month, it hasn't changed my sleep yet, but what I haven't done with it is I haven't done this practice, but from the lens of the childhood experiences or the teenage experiences. So I think that's what I'll try now, is this meditation of really experiencing the emotion, the sadness, the rage, the grief, and then letting that be, as he described, the peak of the wave, allowing my body and system to kind of, feel that, and then know that it can go back into a more soothed state, feel it again, bring it up and down, and just allow that flow. So I've done that for daily experiences. It's what I've been working on for the past month, but I haven't done it with trying to address the emotions of my younger years. So that's what I'll try.
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful idea from John, and it's going to have given you that skill of self-soothing.
Yes.
And those are, two things you just mentioned, the experiencing the emotions and then the self-soothing. You didn't get either of those growing up. And those are two essential.
Yeah, both were true.
Yeah, and they're both essential human skills. And, we learn self-soothing from having our parents soothe us. And your parents did the opposite. They created the opposite of soothing. They created an environment through, they were doing their best. We don't bash parents on this podcast, but they created a minefield that you were living in all the time. And the only way you can survive in a minefield is to suppress your fear and rage and shame, and try to fix the minefield and minimize the explosions as much as you can. And that becomes an intense focus. And when you're intensely focusing on that, there's no self-soothing going on.
Yeah, there's no emotional expression and there's no self-soothing. That's a really, really strong point.
And I think, from listening to you, that is going to be the last and biggest step in your healing process. I think that when you have learned this skill, which is just like learning to surf, you just keep doing it. I mean, I've taken surfing lessons, and it would be embarrassing if somebody showed a video, but it's the same kind of thing. You keep practicing it. You didn't get to learn it as a kid, just as you didn't learn surfing as a kid, but you can acquire this skill. And I think when you do, you're going to sleep.
Yeah, and that's exactly kind of, he related in a way I could understand of thinking of it. I think of like getting high quality reps in the weight room. Like, you're not going to see that strength and that muscle build necessarily immediately, but you're getting those high quality reps. For a fact your body will change eventually. And I'm taking that same approach to this practice, that I know eventually my brain and brain body connection will change eventually. And I think I just want to say thank you so much, because I will do this practice, but I will do it for little me, as the emotions of my younger self. And I think that will have a powerful impact.
Yeah, it's a real challenge when you have anger and resentment towards people that were doing their best. But it's a legitimate emotion, and deserves to be there. And it once that's accepted and put into words, it makes a huge difference. Okay, very good. Any other questions you have for me, or anything else you'd like to say before we close?
I don't think so. Just thank you so much. This has been an amazing resource for me, and I know for a fact that I will find like a the end result that I want. So, I appreciate it, and I'm here for the patient's aspect of
Yes.
it.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I know you are a person of tremendous courage, and I'm so grateful that you have shared this story. We don't often get people on this podcast who are still struggling with symptoms. So your sharing of that is going to be tremendously helpful to everybody who sees it. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you as well.